that is going along with the 350 Westfield History Program. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Herkey.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Okay. We are here to perform a short play for you this afternoon. And as Mistress Palmer said, we will be giving you all kinds of, we hope, interesting facts about Westfield's history. And you probably already know that Westfield is celebrating a big birthday this year. Mistress Palmer just told you how old is Westfield? 350 years old. Have you seen the cake?
Yes.
Pretty cool, right?
No.
Okay. So the first thing that's going to happen is the play, and then you will be followed back to your classroom by Dr. Brown and Mistress Slozak to do some more fun activities with you in your classroom. Okay, you ready? Enjoy.
Would you like to explain what they have
I'm
to
going
do?
to explain that I need some of the children's help while we're doing, hands down, because I'm going to use all of your help. Ready? Now, what's going to happen is at some point in the play, I'll hold up a card, and you either do what it says or you read what it says. But I'm going to tell you what to do, so don't worry about it. We'll have it all under control. Are you ready? Good to know. Mistress Nolan.
Thank you. Greetings. I am Prudence Clearwater. How are you?
Good.
I said, how are you?
Good.
Ah, yes, good to know. Now, does anyone know why we are here this afternoon?
Well, I'm here because she's driving.
Yeah, well, I'm just here because I like to dress up.
I'm here because I just think it'll be fun.
I know. It's because they all got out of their classroom this afternoon. See, I'm right. I know I'm right.
I think it's because their teachers brought them down here.
That's true.
And I'm here because you told me to be here.
And I'm here because I got nothing.
Oh, shh! Not you! No, I'm asking them. Now, can anyone tell me why we are here? Yes, sir.
To celebrate the 350 days of Westfield.
Perfect. Yes, that is exactly why we're here. We are here to celebrate Westfield's 350th birthday. We are well over 300 years. Yes, absolutely we are. We are so old.
How old are we?
Yes, pretty darn old, yes. All right, now, I want everyone in the back row quiet and under control. I am the leader, and you are just the contestants. Got it?
Got it.
No interrupting.
No
interrupting.
I know everything.
Everything.
Everything. Zip it! Yeah. Shh. Shh. Yeah. I shall begin. As I said, I am Prudence Clearwater, and I am the authority on Westfield history. Sort of. Now, long ago.
All right, children, this is your cue. You're going to say this. You ready?
How long ago was it?
They're so goodwill. More than 350 years ago, Westfield was discovered by English colonists who came from eastern Massachusetts when we were known as Massachusetts Bay. Yes, what is it? Can I help you?
Well, you know, people were living here when the English came. They didn't need to be discovered. They knew who they were, and they knew where they were, and they'd already been here for hundreds of years.
Are they Indians? Is that what was living here? Indians?
Yes, the Native Americans were here all along.
Yes.
They were here.
Well, you're correct. Thank you. Who is that guy? Is he a contestant?
No. He isn't a contestant. That is Dr. Robert Brown from Westfield State University, a well-known Westfield historian. And he's going to be your fact checker.
Oh. Fact checker?
Yes.
We need a fact checker? Are you saying that I don't know my history? Well, all right, fine. Let's continue. All right, today we are going to have a lightning round of Westfield history. Each contestant has only a few minutes to share their information with you. When the bell rings, thank you, they will begin. And then, when the bell rings again, thank you, they will be done. Thank you. And the winner will be the person who gives the best and the most accurate information. All right. Shall we begin? Yes? Ebenezer, you are first. Now, your question is, who were the first English to come here?
Thank you, Prudence.
Yes. Bell!
The first English came to the Westfield area around 1640. Now that's before the 350s in 1669, before 350 years ago. They came here to Westfield to trade fur with the Warrenoke Indians. Oh, fur back then was as good as money. In fact, it was even better. Lots of times they used it as money. They'd gather around by the Westfield River, and that's where they'd trade their furs. Now, we don't know where they went after they traded the furs because, well, they didn't have social media back then or colonial twittering or anything where we could follow them. But anyway, fur trading was the rule of the day. Now, does anybody know what animal's fur they really, really wanted most?
I do. Bear.
Nope.
Dear?
Nope.
It was moose, right?
Wrong again. Fox. Still wrong.
Jackalope.
Jackalope.
Oh, wait, I know what a jackalope is. It's that rabbit with the antlers.
No.
I am sorry, but Bell,
What?
your time is up.
Oh, wait. I didn't finish. I didn't get to tell him exactly where the fur trading took place. And we didn't even name the animal whose fur they wanted the most. Okay, you guys. What animal's fur did they want the most? Beaver! We have a winner! It's not me, but you guys win! Beaver!
Beaver?
Beaver!
Really?
Yes!
Oh, right, of course. Oh, I get it. Yes, beaver. Because people wanted to swim, and they wanted the beavers to make a
No. The beavers did not make ponds for swimming. That is not what they did. They're not swimming pool builders. Oh, please, Dr. Brown.
In the 1700s, everybody wore hats. They had to make the hats out of something, and they wanted something that was waterproof. Animal skins were the best for waterproof. And beaver, because they spend so much time in the water, made the best waterproof skins. So, the fur traders came, bought the furs from the Native Americans to make hats. Everybody made money. Everybody had dry heads. Everybody was happy, except the beavers.
Yes, of course. I knew that.
Yes, well, the colonists brought some of their supplies with them when they arrived here. But very soon they discovered that they had to make things on their own here in order to survive and to live. They weaved their own clothing, they made their own hats, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Originally, as part of Springfield in 1669, there were enough people living in town around the area to make a town or a village. They were granted permission by the General Court in May of 1669 to become their own separate township, separate from Springfield. The first name that they chose was Streamfield, for a while anyway. But very soon they changed it to Westfield.
Yes, 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 and of course, we all know why they called it Westfield.
But I wanted to tell them
Never
why they called it Westfield.
mind, I will tell them. Yes, it's because Westfield was the furthest town west. Yeah!
Not that kind of West. You're not going to put on your cowboy hat. No.
Yahoo!
Brown again.
Well, it's true that Westfield was the furthest town west in Massachusetts, but there were other towns further west. Albany in New York State was further west. The real name for the change of a name in this town from Streamfield to Westfield was because the land here was owned by people in Springfield, and they named all the towns around them. On the east side of Springfield, they created a town and called it Eastfield. On the north side of town, they created another village and they called it Northfield. On the south side of town, there was the state of Connecticut, so they just had a place for the cows there and they called it Longmeadow. On this side, they called it Westfield.
Oh, yes, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. All right, next, Clara.
Yes.
Now, your question is to tell us, where did most of the people settle?
Oh, well, you know, Westfield became a separate town 350 years ago. You heard that, right? Now listen, I'm not that old. Just so you know.
Clara,
I know we
Clara,
we're
you're being
what?
timed.
Oh,
Let's go.
Oh, yes, there's that. All right. So, most of the people in Streamfield, Westfield, lived in 3 different areas. One of them, the first one, was on Union Street. And they actually called that the cellar area because they actually built their homes into the side of the hills. So they kind of called that the cellar area. Then there were other areas where people lived. For example, if you know where Home Depot is, the road that goes down by Home Depot was near the river, so many of the people lived there. But most of the people eventually moved right onto Main Street, Westfield, because it was good to be near a waterway. Because there was fishing and there were other things that they could do on the water.
Belle!
And that's where they got their... Now wait a minute, I wasn't done yet.
Oh, you are now.
Well,
Yes,
what
we're
about
back.
the houses and the items that they used to cook with and all that sort of thing?
Yes, yes, you can do that later. Step
But
back.
wait, did you know, and this is a good thing for them to know now, that back in that day, you could be arrested for wearing silk. Anybody have anything silk on? Because you could go right to, see? She would go right to jail because you were not allowed to wear silk. You were allowed to wear a plethora of fur. And nowadays, it's the opposite, right? Because you can wear all the silk you want, but it's not really a good idea to wear fur, right?
Thank you, Clara.
Oh,
Step back, Clara. Thank you. All right, before we go on, Professor, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I think maybe the first thing we ought to add is that area that most people lived in is this area. This is where the original settlement was, just a little bit closer to Main Street. The other thing, I know that in England there were all these battles over silk, but here in Westfield most people were poor. They were more worried about getting enough to eat and a warm place to live, and they didn't worry too much about whether they wore silk or not. Basically, they didn't have any.
Oh, again, I knew that. Yes, moving right along. Next is Sarah. Yes, here is your question. What did children do in early days here in Westfield?
Oh, yes. As soon as the village was settled, guess where you had to go?
Ready?
School. Yes. As soon as they settled, school was a big thing. The first schools were held in someone's house, but very shortly after people moved to Westfield, a school was built somewhere on Main Street, maybe in 1700. Even back then, all children were supposed to be taught how to read, and they had to pay a fee to attend school.
Whatever. Move back, yes. Moving on. Anna, I want you to tell us more about the lives of the children here.
And I'm being timed.
You are being timed.
All right, okay. So, children back then went to school. Girls went to school, boys went to school, but sometimes the girls didn't go as long as the boys, and sometimes the girls didn't go at all. You want to know why? It's because the girls stayed home and they learned how to sew, and they learned how to cook, and they had to take care of all the little brothers and sisters. And the boys, think about this. They went to school, they had knives, maybe an axe, because the chores they had to help with were things like chopping the wood. And if you had a place where you grew things, because you had to grow your own food, the boys had to help with that. Then when everything was grown and ready to be harvested, the boys had to help with that too. So the chores that the boys had were things like chopping wood and doing things that the father would do. Children did the same chores as adults. They didn't have a whole lot of time for playing. They didn't have colonial video games or colonial flicks and Netflix colonial. Anyway, they did have some games though. They did play.
Belle! Yes.
Did I win?
Step
No,
back.
but you forgot to mention that the children were required to go to school, to go to church with their families every Sunday. And we might have stayed there all day long. Our first church, Dr. Brown, was on Main Street.
Main Street.
And then after that, we moved down to the church on Broad Street. And the first minister there was Reverend Taylor, and he was there for a very long time.
Yes, Dr. Brown, do you have anything to add?
No, I think they've done a pretty good job.
All righty then. Our last contestant is the famous John Noble.
Oh, well, that is my husband. I am Mrs. John Noble. John is home milking the cows.
Would you fill in for him?
I shall fill in for John.
Excellent.
The famous John Noble. Well, John wasn't really famous himself, but the name Noble is very well known and famous in Westfield. Raise your hands and tell me where you have heard the name Noble before in Westfield.
Noble Cross.
Yeah? Anybody else? I'm going to go through that.
Bay State Noble.
Bay State Noble Hospital. Remember, I'm saying noble, not mobile, and they do sound very similar. It's noble. You are correct. Both of those men who started those or who were responsible were Westfield nobles. So when you go to Barnes and Noble, that's kind of exciting to think that they're now all over the country. And that was Gilbert Noble from Westfield. But there were other many famous names from Westfield, Noble being one of the first ones to come here. And Thomas Noble was one of the first settlers to have a land grant in the city of Westfield. But besides that, we have Lieutenant Richard Valley, who had a gun armory and made guns during the American Revolution. And we also had General Shepherd. General Shepherd did fight in some of the battles alongside of George Washington. You might have heard the name Shepherd.
Yes,
because
thank
of
you.
his shepherd
Thank you.
statue.
Thank you. Yes. Step back, Mrs. Noble.
But the statue.
That's okay.
But the shepherd.
Well, we all know that General Shepherd was a famous warrior in the Revolutionary War who even fought alongside George Washington. And we all know that his statue which is on Broad Street, looks this way down Broad Street with the green behind him so that he could face the traffic.
No, no, Dr. Brown, please.
The statue of General Shepherd in the center of town was put up 100 years ago this summer. And he's placed where he is because by that time, Westfield was a city and it was all built up all around there. That was really the only central place in town to put him. He's facing down Broad Street because that's the main road, or was the main road, to Connecticut. And it was Connecticut people who settled Westfield. The final reason is that the people who put the statue up, most of them lived on Broad Street. So he's facing their home.
Oh.
I knew that.
No, you didn't.
Well, really, that ends our lightning round of Westfield history. Now it's going to be up to you to vote.
Yeah, but wait a second,
Oh,
wait a
what?
second. I didn't tell them about the canal. You know, we had a canal that went right through the middle of town, and there was a big pond right where the Stop and Shop is today. They used to turn around in that pond and go back up the other way. People could ride on the barges, and lots of supplies and things went up and down the canal, and children skated on the pond in the wintertime.
And I didn't get to tell him about the railroad that came after the canal that went right through the middle of town. And you know what about that railroad? It was so noisy. Whoop, whoop! You know, that kind of noise? And it went through the middle of town. Well, what were they riding on? Horses, carriages with horses, and that noise would make the horses go crazy and they'd throw people off and out of the carriages. So they had to raise the railroad above the street and, I guess my time's up.
What about the whip factories? After all, Westfield is called the Whip City because we had so many whip factories in the 1800s and 1900s.
And the Palisade. Don't forget the Palisade. It was this enormous fence built all around the settlement for protection.
And we didn't mention the normal school, established here in Westfield in 1844. Became a famous teaching school, and for a time, it was housed in our own city hall.
And now is what?
And
Now it's Westfield State University.
And we didn't talk about Wolf Pit Meadows and Locherville and Mosley Park and Warnoco Park and, oh wait, Wallam's Bottom.
Oh, enough. I need a winner, not a whiner. Oh, we can't retell all of the history in this past 350 years, but we can tell the children how to find this information. All right, it is time to vote. Here's what we're going to do. The contestants will step down when I call their names, and you will clap. Remember to clap for the one who gave you the best and most accurate information. All right, so let's start with Ebenezer. Clara. Anna. Sarah. Abel. Mrs. Wait a second. I can't really tell who won. All right, so Dr. Brown, you're the official fact checker. Maybe you can help out here.
Oh wait,
Well,
What is happening here? What?
you did ask for the person to win who has the most accurate, best information. That would obviously be
Mr.
Dr. Brown. And there were two things boys and girls mentioned in some of the issues that they brought up that happened right here, very close to where you are. Two of the things we mentioned were just about right where you are, and I'm going to ask Dr. Brown. I'm going to put him on the spot. He doesn't know I'm going to ask this, but I know he'll know the answer. One of the things we mentioned was the canal, and the other thing we mentioned was the Palisade. We said Palisade. Palisade is a fence. Dr. Brown, could you very quickly tell them where the canal was?
Canal?
Because where they are?
Is right where the high school is, St. Mary's High School. That's the canal. It went right back down, and East Bartlett Street, which is right out in front of us, there was a big pond out there. On Mechanic Street, out here at your back parking lot, the parking lot that's right behind here, there was a bridge over the canal, right there. And up until 100 years ago, every spring when the snow melted, that bridge would wash out and this area would be underwater. And in fact, there were big floods in Westfield, where this whole area was underwater. But East Bartlett Street, there were mills over there, whip factories and grist mills, and a big pond in the street. So this was a very unusual early part of Westfield. Secondly, the Palisade. People think there was a fence around early Westfield. There probably wasn't. But just at the head of Mechanic Street, up there is where the cemetery is, the old burying ground. You know where that is? Okay. That was just outside of the original village, because that's the highest ground. If you ever have a chance to go into the old burying ground, go to the back fence and look. You'll see the ground drops way off down to White Street. And that's where that stream ran that was part of the canal. It ran into the river that way. And that's where the fence was. It's out there.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So you live in one of the oldest sections of the city of Westfield. And it's so old that before we leave you, we're going to sing Happy Birthday to Westfield. Are you ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3, sing.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Westfield. Happy birthday to you.
All righty, before we leave, and you will go back to your rooms, we do hope you've learned something. Please go home and share with your parents one thing that you learned this afternoon, reminding you that your 350th birthday is ongoing throughout the year. There'll be a great parade, a lot of things happen. Check the local news or go on the Facebook page and get the information. Have your parents check it. My name is Mistress Palmer.
Robert Brown.
Bill Stroud. The other Mistress Palmer.
Rock Palmer.
Mistress Furkey.
Mr. Spanish.
Mistress Slocum.
And thank you very much, St. Mary's. We were so happy to be able to come and visit with you this afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
In third grade, we'll have Mistress Slozak is their visitor, and fourth grade.
Goody.
And Mistress Palmer will be going with Mistress Slozak, and fourth grade, we'll be getting Dr. Brown as their visitor.
No, I hate strict.
Thank you.